So just for kind of some logistics and housekeeping items today, we are going to have a presentation from Miss Lena Mack at the Durham Community Land Trustees Organization at 11. So she's kind of got a tight schedule today. So we've kind of front loaded our agenda. As soon as she joins us, if we're in the middle of something, we'll try to wrap up, let her do her presentation, and then we'll kind of conclude and wrap up anything after that we were unable to finish prior to her joining us. We will likely have her for about 20 to 30 minutes. She's going to do kind of a quick presentation on their experience. I would imagine opportunity for questions. We are expecting a few members of the public to join us today, so we're excited about that. Something new for this group. Two of them will be from the Boston Thurman United organization, because they are potentially interested in considering the community land trust in their area. So, this is kind of a 2-for-1 with Ms. Mack. So if you see or hear anything from them, that is why. Any questions before we get started?
Who's all on?
What do you mean?
Right now, because I don't have that many people on my screen. Who's on?
Oh, should we do a quick roll call? We can do that. So do we have Representative Montgomery? Is he joining us right now? I can't see everyone myself. Let's see. I have on here, I have Donna, Lisa, and I should specify Lisa Sari, our co-chair, and also Lisa Terry, who's joining us from Financial Pathways. I have Tom. I have some folks from the city, myself, Mellon, Sharon Richmond, our deputy director. Shavonda appears to be on the call as well. Marla is active. I'm not sure if she's actually on the call at this exact moment, but she will be joining us. Then we have someone from our marketing department for the live stream. We have Paul, Norby, Ryan, and I have someone who says iPhone. I'm not sure who that is.
Hi, April. This is George Reed. It's me.
Thank you, George. Good morning to you. Thank you for bearing with the tech issues.
April?
Yes, ma'am.
This is Mellon. Could you send something to Shavonda? I don't know if she's on the line, but I just saw an email from Mr. Montgomery to say he's getting an invalid access.
Are you sure that wasn't his old email from earlier?
I don't know.
Mellon, this is Shavonda. I'll take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Shavonda. I'm just trying to see. Oh, it looks like Representative Montgomery's been able to join us. Good morning.
Great. Thank you.
Good morning. All right.
Okay. Thank you for bearing with us. Okay. So I think for all intents and purposes, we're ready to go. So Tom, we're going to take it away with you. We're going to hear how things are going with the employer assisted housing program. Hopefully I can provide a little bit of an update as to kind of some of the things we've been working on as a staff to help in what you and Marla have been doing, and then we'll go from there. So take it away, Tom.
Is Marla on? Because if she's going to be on, I'd rather wait because she and I were together at the last meeting, so I don't want to leave something out that she might want to present. So if she's going to be on, let's wait until she gets on.
She's on another call right now. This is Sharon. She's on another call, but she'll be joining us. I don't know when she'll be joining us, but she's on another call now.
Let's just move on to the next item, because she and I are kind of teamed up on the last meeting, and I just think it makes more sense for both of us to present.
Okay, that's fine. So we'll move on to the investor outreach. I know there was some conversation in the working group as to kind of what you all wanted to do. Does someone from that working group kind of want to provide the group with a general update and synopsis of last meeting's conversation around where you all would like to head with that? Not everyone at once.
Maybe somebody's muted.
Yeah, I have a lot of folks muted, it looks like.
I was only able to join for the first half of that meeting, but I think we continued the conversation around trying to hone in on the types of what we kind of really mean by investors. If we're looking more for philanthropic investment to support existing organizations or project level kind of equity investment in deals, and maybe how we get to the various folks that may play a role in that instance. And so looking at what investors around the state and say Charlotte and Durham and Raleigh are active. So not just financial institutions, but healthcare and otherwise. And I think some of the conversation was maybe we see how the employer assisted pilot goes, because I know that we're already engaged with some of the healthcare institutions related to that. But we do know those institutions are playing or their peers are playing a role in communities like Charlotte. And then as far as outreach, if we're not going to hone it in, or if we want to keep it very broad to start with, maybe the first place to go is to one of the CRA working groups in the state where there's a broad representation of financial institutions that if those individuals wouldn't be the right people to participate, they might at least be able to point us in the right direction. And so I've had some of that initial conversation with John Stokes in Truist that participates in one of those, and to kind of open that up for others to outreach to folks they have connectivity with in other institutions to see if we could maybe get in front of that group or just kind of spread the word that that was something through that institution that that Winston-Salem was looking to do. So I don't know if others have things to add, but that's where we started the conversation, at least.
Okay. So who's in your working group? It's Paula, you, Lisa, and Derwin, is that right? Okay. So I guess to kind of open up the conversation, Lisa, from a developer point of view, what is there any other angle that you can think of that might be smart in terms of fostering physical development that could be part of this overall solution that the group's trying to come up with in terms of resources?
Well, again, I think the best thing for the city to do to get immediate properties built and accomplished is to put out an RFP.
Okay.
That's easy for developers to respond to. And given the time of year, I think we could put it together pretty quickly. It depends on where the city wants this housing and that kind of thing. But, I know that developers are always looking, we are, for sites to develop. And, we go into the communities based on the QAP. And, if a city, basically if they put out, where they would like to see this housing, developers, like myself, they race to, try to help communities build these properties, where they would like them located. So that's really the only thing, April, that I can think of. Obviously, the pre-app in North Carolina is due, I want to say it's around January the 20th. Don't quote me. Need to go look it up. But in my mind, that would be the most instant, thing to get housing moving here quickly, especially just given our current circumstances. Obviously we're an essential business because we have, residents. But, doing everything is so much harder, or it has been since March. And so, even with development activities, it's hard to get to sites. It's hard to identify sites. It's hard to meet with cities. So if there was something clear that the city put out, I really believe that it would be met with open arms, and the city would have lots of options of people that wanted to do business in Winston. Okay.
So just to make sure I'm understanding, one strategy is to look at resources above and beyond just the funds, but one being very specific in what the city is looking for to perhaps expedite and more prescribe, as well as sites are obviously a resource that you're looking for, that can be something that can expedite it quickly.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that gets a little bit to kind of the chicken or the egg issue of the investor roundtable is until we really know what the needs are and what the gaps are, it's hard to go out to the investment community or the philanthropic community and ask for their participation because they're going to say, participate how? And if we, are able to attract some developers and we find that to develop those properties, the gap looks like X, then we can start to try to solve for a specific solution versus trying to bring folks together and then build something towards kind of the broader goals.
Okay.
Well, all I can say is that, when we go into communities, we like to figure out, from those communities, a lot of times we have cities that come to us and say, I have this old school, we specialize kind of in a niche, so it's hard to use us as an example. But for instance, if they have an old school that's, been vacated, the city will come to us and say, can you develop this school? Because that's what we, kind of what we do. And we, are familiar with how to put it on the National Register and stuff like that. So it wouldn't take any necessarily financial piece other than, there being abandoned property or whatever that they're trying to get, back on the, they want redeveloped and, housing to exist, and they just work in partnership with us. And it makes it a lot easier than, for instance, developers just driving into communities and saying, here's a piece of land,
Sure.
that you've got the community support. And it's something that a community wants to do.
Okay.
I'd like to ask a follow-up question with that, or not a follow-up question, but I guess more of a statement. Based on that last comment about what having community support and what they'd like to do, maybe I've missed it, or maybe I haven't, but do we have any plans in the very near future to try and start meeting with people in the community to find out what their needs and wants are versus, with what it is that we're trying to do?
I think that's a good point.
We've been meeting for a while, and I just didn't know if that was on the horizon anytime soon.
Not that I'm aware of. Obviously, I think, COVID's changed probably a lot about, I think, how this group has evolved and now kind of shifted a little bit. As well as I think there's a few tertiary things that are happening at the same time. With the Choice Neighborhood, the Boston Thurman group kind of has their own thing that they've been doing, and we have a few of those folks listening in on this call today. But nothing holistically, no. There was the For Everyone Home initiative that included, some of the neighborhood outreach regarding displacement and anti-displacement measures, but nothing completely. And so I would say if that's something that this group would like to do, and I absolutely could see a value and a purpose in that, we'd need to come up with a structure of what that might look like. And, the outreach, obviously, in light of COVID, we would need to think about the logistics and make sure it's meaningful and we're still reaching people without physically touching people, right? So, this is something that, George, I could see your working group focusing quite a bit on, with it being, access and services. I think that's a very human element working group to the work that you all are doing. Is that something that we want to add in earnest to next month's working group and then come back to this group the following month and see if we can put together a solid plan?
A question about that.
Yeah.
George, and for me, I totally agree 100% that the public participation and community engagement is amazingly important, and there's nothing that we want to do or put forward that doesn't have that directly engaged. The only thing that I would say is that a lot of the data and information that's coming to us, whether it's the affordable housing, the housing studies, the For Everyone Home information, all of those things that's coming to us that's helping to inform our decision making or how we're thinking about strategies, all came with amazing amounts of public engagement and input. And I'm wondering if the public engagement comes in the space of these studies that are kind of colliding together now, and we're kind of looking at it and trying to make recommendations based upon that information. Once we get a short list of things, okay, we heard you all gave your input in this study, and this study. We shifted through those things, and these are the 5-10 things that we think make sense that we heard from the community through these studies. Now shop those items back out to the community to say, okay, did we hear you clearly through these things? I'm just wondering if that's a better approach to the community engagement than kind of restarting all that all over again.
I agree. And again, I just wanted to make sure that that was something I did throw out there. I just want to make sure that the research that was done in the past is still relevant as it goes on for today, as well as making sure that we still keep that in the front, because we need to keep our residents in the front of things with what we're trying to decide to do. So I just didn't want it to disappear, like out of sight, out of mind. I just wanted to make sure that we did continue to focus on that. But I do understand.
But no, and I think one of the relevant places of public engagement right now that I don't believe is captured in the data we have is what is the current COVID impact on people. I don't think that that's truly captured in the information that we have right now. I think most of the information we have is pre-COVID. And so I think there is value in understanding that impact that's happening right now to speak with and engage with the data we already have. So I think that there, at least for me, I think that's where the additional value may lie.
Gotcha.
This is Paul, and I agree with what Derwin just said, that it seems like, we are kind of searching and looking in different areas for possible approaches. And I think it would help in terms of getting meaningful public input if we kind of sift through that and narrow down a little bit more, so we have something to get reaction to. Certainly not narrowed down completely, but narrowed down some, so at least we have something to explain. I do have one other comment that I wanted to make. Lisa, a few minutes ago, brought up the idea of an RFP. So if and when an RFP becomes appropriate, I know one thing that developers get nervous about is sites that aren't already zoned, because the prospect of going through a 3 to 4 month rezoning process where the outcome is not certain is a little bit scary to developers trying to put in a lot of investment in putting together site plans and things like that. So I know about 3 years ago, maybe 3 to 4 years ago, planning put together an inventory of already zoned multifamily sites that don't have to go through the rezoning process. So that might be one resource to reach out and grab when we get closer to putting together an RFP, because there you could identify, in fact, this group could narrow down that inventory of already zoned sites into sites that make sense from where you want to have future affordable housing and all that. And that would be something of value that could be put into an RFP that would give developers something to go on without the risk of having to go through a rezoning process.
Oh, I think that's an excellent idea.
Sorry, just taking some fast and furious notes here. anything else about, the investor outreach, so I'm hearing particularly, Ryan, what you're saying about, what is the ask? We can't kind of just, if you build it, they will come approach of just coming up with random solutions to issues. Yet I think on the flip side, a lot of what we're hearing in the community in general, and I think nationwide, is there's not enough resources, right? So is there some way we can kind of loosely build a resource bench without having tangible projects in queue? Do we see a way for that to happen or not at all?
Ryan mentioned one thing, and I can just touch on it for a second, that we unearthed a sleeping giant when Marla and I got together with Wake Forest Baptist and Novant. Novant's been hit a little harder with COVID than Wake Forest Baptist in resources. Wake Forest Baptist really wants to get involved in several different things that we're looking at. And they would be someone that I think, Ryan, we can look at bringing into the investment pool.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can, if we determine how to message it appropriately, I think we can start to bring those groups together. But it's just asking folks to join kind of an investor group is a difficult conversation when they don't know what they're committing to and who the appropriate person to represent their organization is in that conversation. And so that's where, again, it's kind of a chicken or the egg thing. You want to have the resources before you go and try to attract the developers or the nonprofits or whomever is going to engage in that segment that you're trying to attack and deliver resources to the community for. But I think we can continue to have those conversations. It's just we have to figure out either how to message it or how to hone in on what solution we want to try to attack.
Okay, that's fair.
I don't want to speak for the committee though, so others.
I'm just seeing who's on and who's muted. Okay. Okay. So I think we could probably.
Question about something Brian just said in terms of messaging. Have we done any messaging to date?
Not a lot, no. The group, I'm not sure which group, it might be the long-term planning, has continued to talk about messaging, and we're trying to come up with something that's very uniform in its approach and not using a lot of kind of the trigger words that create, I think, a predisposed response. Affordable housing, people don't really understand what that means. Housing that's affordable, there's multiple definitions depending on who you're talking to. So I think that is probably the first focus, is kind of what is like a set of definitions that everyone agrees on in terms of, as we're talking about this work, what does affordable mean to everyone? Do we even want to use the words subsidized workforce, some of those that are a little confusing to some folks, or may not have an equally understood definition. So that's something that we as a staff have been kind of talking about and pulling a bunch of resources together. And I think pre-COVID, we as a group had kind of started talking about that. I grabbed some stuff, I think, from like Charlotte's website and a few others about that. I know Marla's, one of her master's programs project and final study was on messaging around affordable housing. So we've pooled some resources, but we haven't moved it forward at all yet. So no is the short answer, Paula.
So does that require I guess a communications plan that attacks for the long-term planning in terms of with concrete plan that can be rolled out.
I would think that would make the most sense, but what makes sense to you all?
Yeah, I think it does, and I think you said it right, April. That just some of these things with the COVID has just been kind of disrupted, and I think it's just realigning and getting back on track with where we had been and engaging. Because I think one of those conversations was even around potentially engaging, some local firms in the community to maybe toss some ideas if they were willing to do some in-kind work with us, just even to help us facilitate some of those things. But so I think it is just, we need to just kind of turn back to that so we can have that as a part of, our deliverables.
What would you all like to see? So I think am I correct? It's the long-term planning group who's kind of taking this on as under their work. Is that right? The 9:30 working group?
Yep.
Okay. What would you all like to have available for you before your next working group meeting is? What can we provide to you as a staff, if anything?
To be real, I think it's probably the stuff you've already provided. I think it's probably a refresher to kind of refocus where we were and remind us of the actions that we were getting ready to take. Because I think if I'm remembering correctly, it's like almost after you provided that information and we were kind of heading in a new direction, is kind of where everything kind of stalled a little bit due to COVID. And so I think maybe going back to that last meeting where that information was provided is probably a good start. At least for me, it would be.
I know you mentioned a glossary of terms, as it relates to a common language that, everybody is speaking the same language. I think if we can have that glossary of terms that is, appropriate to, what we're talking about.
Okay.
So we've talked about the RFP process a couple of times. I'd be curious to know if there are hurdles in moving that forward, or things that the committee can do to advance that to get it, into the market sooner.
Okay.
In April, I guess that would be the list of the properties that are already zoned. That'd be a great starting point, I think.
Okay. Yep. So it sounds like we have a lot of these resources, some of which, we've gathered and shared in the group, some of which are in other places, planning department and such, just really getting them back out to you guys now that we're a little bit more focused post-COVID, get those resources to the working groups and kind of give you guys time to digest and work on that. Am I hearing that correct? Okay. We can do that. Did I hear someone? No. Okay. Marla, are you on by chance? No. Okay. Tom, I know you don't want to go without Marla, but can I poke you a little bit?
I just respect her.
I know.
And I just think it would be more appropriate. I would do a very brief, I don't want to get too specific without her. But yeah, Marla and I met with representatives from Novant and Wake Forest Baptist Health. I had met with them separately over the last many months, and finally we decided that the parties were comfortable to get together as a group, and that's when I brought Marla in. As I alluded briefly, Wake Forest Baptist Health is chomping at the bit to go in a dual direction. One, they're interested in, and this is where I don't want to get into too much detail, but they're interested in providing some dollars for some areas of the community. They're at the point where they're asking for data and specifics Ryan was saying. So yeah, I can totally understand where he's coming from because we're already there with Wake Forest Baptist Health. So it was a little difficult because our mission of our subcommittee is not obviously directed in that way specifically, but given you have somebody out there saying, we like what you're talking about, we kind of like to go in this direction too, you're not going to say, well, so yeah, we're working both avenues. The pilot for the employee working together is going to be a little more long-term, but there's definitely interest on both parties, Novant and Wake Forest Baptist. I think the investor pool is going to be a more easy get from Wake Forest Baptist Health quicker and all of that, if we can get the data. And that's where I need Marla, because she's already, I think, started with staff working on that.
Tom, if I can ask, what kind of data are they asking about?
Well, they're trying to determine exactly like Ryan was saying, where we're looking at putting housing to see if it relates to their own staffing needs or their own patient needs. Because as they said, if we're not necessarily able to get into a housing situation that directly benefits their staff, they're okay if they can come up with a scenario where they're indirectly being benefited because we're attacking an area of the community that is depleting their resources because it's a community that is constantly needing medical assistance because they're unstable in their housing environment. So that's kind of the dual sword that we're looking at with Wake Forest Baptist.
I'm curious in your conversations if you know if they are looking at any other health systems investments as models and who that might be. I mean, I know Atrium has done some of that in Charlotte, Duke Health has done some of that in Durham, and then nationally others.
Great point. And yes, and that's where I need Marla, because we got into that for quite a bit. And we're sharing, she had some information on some other similar communities that had worked with health organizations. And so she shared that with them. They're sharing information. So we're into the fire with Wake Forest Baptist Health. And I think it's really going to be a nice relationship. Novant's bureaucracy is a little more difficult to work through. So they're interested. It's just going to take a lot more time. And again, they kind of like the idea of being able to publicly come out at some point and say that they are working, the two major health organizations are working together with the city. So it's going to take time on the Novant side, but on the Wake Forest Baptist, yeah, we can get going because they're already sharing data, which again, if Marla was on, she could give you more specifics.
Another follow.
Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Another follow, Tom. With the Novant side of things, in terms of what do you see as the larger barriers in terms of navigating within their system? Is it just the people that you're talking to maybe are not the decision makers, or what is it?
Yeah, they have a much more bureaucratic structure, and so the individuals that we're talking to basically said they've been looking for something like this to present, and they were going to present it. They keep delaying it, but I think now it's got to be the beginning of next week because they said they were going to present it by the end of the month. But it was going to be for next year. So that's why I keep saying they're on a much slower track. It's just a massive bureaucracy. I mean, they didn't even hide it. they kind of, whereas Wake Forest Baptist is much more straight line. But I think Wake Forest Baptist will help in the regard, like I said, I think they'll pull Novant along a little bit because it'll be like, hey, look what we're doing, and get your bureaucrats to jump on.
That was part of kind of maybe what I was getting at, wondering if maybe we're not at the place yet, but once there's some conversation that move a little further with Baptist, does that mean, is there someone else who may need to reach out to some higher up folks within Novant to say, hey, this is something that you all need to be paying attention to and need to get engaged with?
And I'm looking into that. It's the real key on this, I guess, is going to be, and this is where I go to April, communication, and in this case, keeping the communication quiet for a while, because I'm really trying to make this into something from a PR standpoint that could be pretty neat. But if something starts coming out that one entity is doing something and the other entity is not referenced, that could blow it all up. So we kind of have to just keep it low key until we get somewhere where both parties can feel comfortable about how it's discussed openly.
Sure. So,
you're welcome.
So just as a disclaimer, these are live streamed meetings and they're public bodies. So that said, obviously as we work through nuances and timelines and all of that, absolutely will be discreet, and we will make sure that any partner agency that we work with is given the proper credit and fanfare for any substantial investment that they do in the community that it deserves. A quick little administrative follow-up. I will be verifying with Marla that what I have is plenty, but I know that I think probably the working group as well as potential partner agencies discussed, we're looking for kind of a framework of existing employer-assisted housing programs, kind of what does the administrative structure look like, what are investments, all of those things, right? Like geographic boundaries, terms, and conditions. I do have a pretty robust spreadsheet, I guess, for lack of a better word. Of that, I have about 8 from around the country, primarily focused around healthcare and or like teaching healthcare facilities, hospital university systems. So I did like University of Chicago system, the Cleveland Clinic, Prisma down in North Carolina, South Carolina border, quite a few. So I have that. As soon as it's complete and accurate and everything's kind of been vetted as good, I'll share that with the working group, and you all can utilize that as you need in your work and working with these groups and trying to come up with that. Because I think, the next step is, obviously it's the buy-in, but then also kind of getting back to Ryan's point, what is the ask? What is the program really going to look like? Is it home ownership versus rental? Is it both? There were some that were both. And what are those terms and conditions and the administrative piece of things? Who's going to carry that burden, I'll call it, and what might that look like? So, from a staff point of view, I feel like that's a big next step conversation to move this forward is really what does the group want to see in that regard? Right?
Yeah. April, can you just, Gary, who I've gotten to know very well over at Wake Forest Baptist, he's as I've alluded, they're really on board. So if there's any information that they're asking for that we're having trouble getting or whatever, let me know, because they're getting anxious, I guess. And
Yeah, I don't think that there's,
I don't know where I haven't heard anything in 2 weeks, I guess. So I'm just kind of trying to make sure that I help this thing keep moving. So.
Yes, thank you. Appreciate that. I will follow up with Marla, realistically, probably Monday. I'll send an email today, and I'm sure she and I will talk early next week as to what I have, if it kind of encompasses everything you all talked about that they would want and need.
Okay.
If there's anything missing, I'll gather that and then get that over to your working group so you can move that forward.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be really great.
Hello, Selena.
Hello, April. How are you?
Hi, doing well. Do you see the group?
I do.
Excellent.
Wow. Okay. Just expanding my screen. Okay. Well, hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hey.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm not sure who I'm talking to. Oh, there you go. Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. I don't want to interrupt. I just wanted to kind of, are you ready for me, or you want me to just stand by?
No, by all means. We've already talked as a group that we're working around you today because you've been so kind to share your time with us and your expertise, and this is a big part of the agenda and the information today that we're hoping to get. So I'm just going to let you know we have a few other folks on the call. So this is an appointed coalition body focusing on affordable housing and housing needs throughout our community. And so we have some members of the public who've joined us as well with various interests, but a few of them specifically are on the call because you're joining us today. Okay. Because I think that their neighborhood group is interested in learning whether or not a land trust might be appropriate for the work that they're hoping to do. So you may have either some questions or some follow-up from them. And then realistically, they may reach out to you after this meeting to dive a little deeper specifically in their community, if that's okay with you.
Okay. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there is a group from Winston-Salem that's working directly with Grounded Solutions on the possibility of starting a community land trust, or am I correct about that?
Yeah. Paula, you want to speak to that?
Yeah. Actually, there have been a couple of groups that are interested in a community land trust. So and I think both of them have been in touch with Grounded Solutions, Matt Weber in particular. And one of those I know are on the phone on this call now.
Okay.
And that's the Boston Thurman Community Engagement Roundtable.
Okay. I'm not familiar with that group, but okay. So I have a PowerPoint I was going to share with you, at least part of it, and then I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. But then let me just check in first about the timing on this. So it's about 11 o'clock now. How much time do you have?
We plan for give or take a half hour. I know you've got a tight schedule as well, so whatever works for you.
Okay, so we'll plan on about a 30 minutes then. I think. Okay. I think I can do this in 30 minutes and then follow up with anything that I can't get to. And I'm gonna, let's see, I can move my camera a little bit and make it a little lighter. Yeah, maybe, okay. So can I share my, let's see, first of all, let me find my screen.
And then Selena, would you be willing to share the PowerPoint after the meeting with me as well?
Yeah, certainly.
Perfect. We can see that just fine.
You can. Okay. Now. Okay. Okay. And I'm gonna. This is the power. I didn't create a new PowerPoint. This is something I've had in my stock for some time, and so some of it I'm gonna skip through because I just want to kind of get to mostly a lot of questions. People have more questions, and they don't need to see all the glory here. All the time. So let me start here. So, and again, this is a PowerPoint that I did. There's no date on here, but a while back. But the story doesn't change. Durham Community Land Trustees was created in 1987, but just to kind of give you some context about what the neighborhood was. I mean, in mid-1980s, like a lot of inner city neighborhoods, Durham's West End was kind of in this whole cycle of disinvestment where you had people moving out, housing declining, businesses moving out. The city was putting less money into infrastructure. So you just had a declining environment where, like I said, the whole neighborhood, the whole quality of life around the neighborhood was declining. And I think that's the case in a lot of cities. As I mentioned, we were founded in 1987, but we were founded, what's unique about us is that we were founded by, it was a grassroots effort that created Durham Community Land Trustees, much like many of you, just people fed up with being fed up, tired of being tired, and came together to demand better housing, better policing, better infrastructure from the local government. And what's really unique about this model, and we'll talk a little bit further about this later, is that we're an organization, a land trust organization that's actually governed and accountable to the residents in the community. So the 2/3 of our board actually are people who live in the communities that we serve, and so that's where the accountability comes in, among other ways. So our target areas. So DCLT initially target primarily Durham's West End neighborhood. So these are neighborhoods that sit actually between downtown Durham and Duke University. So here, the dark blue here this is Duke University's campus, and then this right here going this way is downtown. So we're right in between those two. There's two areas in a corridor that's accessible to Highway 40, accessible to Highway 85. And so just the proximity alone, just our location alone makes us vulnerable, or the people who founded DCLT. And again, let me just say that I'm not one of the founding members of Durham Community Land Trustees. But those who did create the organization realize the importance of its location between downtown Durham and Duke and access to major highways in terms of the need to ensure that there's going to be long-term affordability there. So just talking a little bit about why a community land trust model. Mid-1980s, community land trust was a really, really new concept, and not so popular in the South. But the research and that the residents put into determining how to create a nonprofit organization led them to a community land trust model. And mostly, so this talks about kind of why that decision was made. Because there were nonprofits being formed, all over the city of Durham. And like most nonprofits, the organization could have formed as just a traditional housing development organization, but chose to actually create themselves as a community land trust. Because it represented a shift from housing as an individual, the perspective of housing. So no longer doesn't look at housing just as it looked more at housing as a community resource, as opposed to just a wealth building mechanism. And I think land trust model is accountable. We talked a little bit about that. And it's a shared wealth model of land stewardship. So the idea is that the land, even though it's legally in the name of DCLT's name, it's actually community-owned land. And its purpose is to ensure that there's going to be permanent affordable housing there. So no matter what happens to the house on that land, the land is set aside for affordable housing. So if the house burns down, if the house goes away, if the owner decides to move the house, that land is always there and available for affordable housing to be rebuilt there. And it's more or less a bottom-up approach that that has a lot of community involvement. It stabilizes, helps stabilize the neighborhood, opportunities to create home ownership for long-term community residents. So I just want to be clear that the land trust model is actually is actually a home ownership model. many of us, including DCLT, do a lot of rental housing as well, in which we also ensure is going to be long-term affordable, permanently affordable. But the actual model itself, the idea of shared equity between one family to the next, is actually is a home ownership model. And it's actually one other thing I want to put. It's actually designed for kind of new housing, so it's not. Existing homeowners are not expected to put their homes in the land trust model or in the land trust itself. So I wanted to make that clear. I recently ran into a situation where homeowners thought they were being expected to sell their homes into the land trust, but that's certainly not the case. This is additional housing or new housing being created, and obviously it creates a long-term affordability. And as a barrier to gentrification. So I just also want to be clear that the land trust model doesn't prevent gentrification. It's a barrier. If you can get a good start on it, it's a good barrier to gentrification. And just legally, by definition, it's a nonprofit organization that was created to hold land for the benefit of the community. And ensure that access to affordable housing for community residents. Let's see, okay. So the next few slides can actually just kind of give you some ideas of some of the work that we did, or we've done over the years. And so some of our strategic direction was to renovate, replace existing housing stock. So a lot of our work personally has been around renovation of existing housing stock. So as opposed to new construction, we spend a lot of time and effort on renovating what was already here, and to stabilize the neighborhood by increasing our home ownership opportunities. So when DCLT first started, it was at least 75% of this community was rental housing, and it was actually owned mostly by absentee landlords. The West End is one of Durham's oldest neighborhoods, just outside of downtown. And a lot of the properties here were heir properties and have been passed down from generations to generations, and were rental housing owned by people who no longer lived here, or relatives like the grandson of so-and-so who no longer lived here, and had actually no ties or commitment to the community, but had this rental housing that they weren't taking care of. I'm going to skip through that. And then, of course, at some point, DCLT did get into rental housing because the need was there. And we've been able to generate, well over 200 units of rental housing in the West End community. Well, not just in the West End, but throughout Durham now. We've expanded considerably throughout the inner core or the urban core of Durham. So we are very much into affordable rental housing because the need was there. And this is housing that we will maintain indefinitely as rental housing. And in fact, we personally actually self-manage all of these properties that are in our portfolio. But most of them, as you can see, are single family, small multifamilies like duplexes and triplexes. It's few large multifamily projects that we have done. I was going to say at some point. And of course, we've also done some commercial development as well. And this one, the orange and red building here is actually our office here on West Chapel Hill Street. So the West End neighborhood has a corridor, and this is a corridor that runs between downtown Durham and Duke, a commercial corridor. And it was also in bad shape. In fact, when I came to work for the Land Trust, there were 19 businesses on this corridor. It's about a 3 or 4 block corridor. And of the 19 buildings on this corridor, 11 of them were vacant. And so that kind of gives you some perspective. So creating commercial space was also important to DCLT in its latter years. I mean, not in its latter years, but not until 2000s, not early, like in 1987, we were still focused on housing. But I'm going to now we're going to fast forward to kind of give you some ideas of what the effect of the gentrification has had on the neighborhood. And again, I'm focused on the West End neighborhood, even though we serve more neighborhoods now. Let's skip that one. Hopefully, you know what gentrification kind of is. And this kind of gives you some idea. This is actually was created in 2015, so it's now 5 years old, but it gives you some idea as to how the price per square foot was increasing in the surrounding neighborhoods. This star here represents downtown Durham, so you get some ideas to kind of what housing pricing was doing in between 2005 and 2015, and these are percentage increases. I can do that. And of course, with gentrification comes obviously, rising housing costs. So we're DCLT, even to this day, I think the highest price we've ever sold a house for maybe 140. It's probably the highest price we've ever sold. But these are houses that are in our neighborhood. In fact, this house that sold for $275. This house next door to it is actually a land trust homeowner, and actually who probably bought their home in early '90s for maybe $50,000 or something. But it just kind of gives you some ideas to what the housing costs are in our neighborhoods now, somewhere around $500,000. And we've also had a very aggressive redevelopment of commercial space as well. So this has also been one of the things that has attracted people to the neighborhood is the new commercial development that's here. So we have a co-op, which is a grocery store, but a lot of people love to be within walking distance of these kind of businesses. So it has put a lot of pressure on our neighborhoods. But I do know that, let's see, okay, we won't talk about that. And this is our expansion. Let's keep going. Let's talk a little bit about that. So I do want to, because I know I'm talking to city officials or here, I just want to talk a little bit about, some of the things that were catalytic to our development. So, we didn't, we're a nonprofit organization, but, there's a lot of nonprofit organizations. And yeah, we consider ourselves special because we're a community land trust, but there are some things that were catalytic to our success that helped make us successful. And they were things like, things that the city often has some control over or some input in, and things like, affordable housing bond referendums. 1987, the city of Durham passed an affordable housing bond referendum. And the reality is that's what created DCLT. Well, that's what launched us into a formal nonprofit organization. Prior to that, we were just a group of community residents who were meeting, on each other's front porch, marching the city council, making a lot of noise in the neighborhood. But the actual formal formation of DCLT in 1987 was created because there was funding available to hire staffing through this affordable housing bond referendum. And there's been several over the years, but just recently in 2019, Durham passed probably the largest $95 million housing bond referendum that will kind of hopefully take affordable housing and the availability of affordable housing for very vulnerable population to the next level over the next few years. Low-income housing tax credits was one of the ways that we created multifamily housing. So we have a couple of low-income housing tax credit properties. We're not big LIHTC developers. We're mostly single family, scattered site, single family, very small multifamily developers. But we do have a couple of low-income housing tax credit projects. In 2005, the Duke Endowment created a land banking program here that was being managed by self-help, but one of the things it did was it allowed us to land bank properties here in the West End. We actually land banked over 100 properties that were actually held until either DCLT, Habitat, or Self-Help were able to develop them. So we were able to kind of freeze the price at 2005 pricing and develop it in future years. And I think that there's been well over 100 properties that were developed in that. And this was, the timing on this couldn't have been better because this was 2005. And of course, we know that the economy, the economy tanked about 2008, 2009. So the idea that we had all this property land bank was very instrumental in our ability to create additional affordable housing here in the West End. And of course, I just want to talk a little bit about the city. The city recently, in the last 2 or 3 years, passed some affordable housing goals that specifically target the very vulnerable population of people here in Durham that need affordable housing. And so I'm going to stop right here and just see if there are questions that I can specifically address.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Alman. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm curious, especially as you were talking about the amount of property that was available to y'all early on, how big a factor do you feel like that played in DCLT being successful?
The amount of property that was available to us early on we're not talking about land bank property. What are we talking about?
I was talking about land bank property, having access to that where you had fixed the price early on and knew what was available versus going out and having to find it on your own.
Right. So, yeah, that was huge. And again, it was because the economy, things started really tanking in 2008. So just having these properties, and then obviously as we're coming out of that recession, housing prices started going up at that point. So it was very important. And let me just mention it. So one of the things that was done was, so it wasn't like we were out there, each of us trying to buy our own individual property. Self-Help had somebody they had hired specifically to land bank these properties. And this person was out, beating the bushes, finding properties, negotiating with property owners on our behalf, or, on the behalf of the land bank. And they've done it here in the West End, but they did it also in Southside. But it was an ability to create a collective group of properties that could then be targeted or specifically targeted for affordable housing, even though we didn't, as an organization, we didn't necessarily have the capacity to go out and do 50 houses in a year, it gave us time, and it gave us time at a price that we could almost freeze. We ultimately had to pay that loan back. They didn't give us the properties. We actually had to purchase those properties. But that's when the city of Durham came in. Again, they provided the grants or the grants that allowed us to purchase those properties out of the land bank. Did that answer your question, Ryan?
It did. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Selena, this is Paul Norby. I'm the guilty party, I think, who suggested that we head your way and find out about this. I was back in the 80s and 90s planning director in Durham when you all were getting
I was going to say, yeah, I remember.
I remember that first housing bond. I'm wanting to say it was something like 6 million, 8 million, 9, somewhere, but it was single digits, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But like I said, he created all of it. He created us.
Yeah, but I can't remember, when the Community Land Trust made use of the city housing bond money, was it in help in acquiring properties, or was it for helping to finance rehab or new construction, or all of it?
All of the above. It created some operating support for the organization, which is what I was saying earlier, so it actually allowed us to actually hire staff. and it also allowed us to acquire properties. And most of them existing properties. I don't think there was any new constructions in the early days. We were actually, acquiring existing property and using a lot of volunteer labor to renovate them, which, is great as getting started. But, fast forward 30 years later, and those houses are, never were actually rehabbed. So, it's good and it's bad. So, it's, anyway, but nonetheless, that's how we got started. So yeah, that bond allowed us to do both, create the organization, create a legal organization as a 501c3, and acquire and renovate some housing.
Yeah, well, you all have done an amazing job, and it's just the fact that the area that you have been targeting is the area between Duke and downtown. That's just strategically speaking, that is really, really good that's your base of operations. I have one more question, is that did any of the investor owners in the neighborhood, did any of them end up giving the property to the land trustees, or did you have to acquire any of them?
So we did have some who donated their properties to DCOT. So we were also, so this is another way the city came in. So the city's code enforcement division, one of the things they were doing were, when they were running across properties that were in, they had needed to address because of its condition, and they had to reach out to the owners, and owners were saying, well, I live 500 miles away. I don't really care about that property. It was like, well, contact DCL, Durham Community Land Trust, to see if they want to buy it, kind of thing. So they were actually instrumental in kind of putting us out there in terms of our interest in acquiring their properties. So there's, this property, there's a street in the West End where we own almost the entire block. And they weren't all, because they may have been owned by a single owner, and he or she was willing to sell the entire block or nearly the entire block. So it doesn't happen much anymore. There's not many big landowners and property owners left in Durham. But back in the 80s, there were people who owned multiple properties in Durham. And we were able to sometimes buy small portfolios of properties. And in fact, what you're looking at here on the screen, I don't know if can you still see my screen? Okay. So what you're looking at here is, in 2016, one of the unique opportunities we had was the purchase of 54 units, collectively, a portfolio of 54 units in Durham's East End, the east side of Durham, so Northeast Central Durham. So not many opportunities. This was a private deal. We couldn't have competed with the, with the private developers for this property, but it was kind of a private sale.
All right, thank you. And again, great work that you all been doing. So.
Thank you, Paul. Good to see you again. Other questions?
One question that I have, this is April with the city, that's come up in our Affordable Housing Coalition discussions, revolve around whether or not homeowners looking to purchase properties within the community land trust model find it difficult to find mortgages through the market, given the lack of home ownership of the land, right? It's difficult, I think, sometimes for financing institutions to look outside of that situation. So what has your experience been, I would say, particularly, post-recession, as a lot of changes happened in the financing market, I guess, what does that look like for your organization and your clients?
Right. So that is often a problem, particularly for new areas of community land trust, and we've had that experience as well. In fact, there's a limited number of housing mortgage lenders to community land trust. And you're right, there were a few more before the recession, and things have tightened up quite a bit. But there are a few, and they're national. They're national banks, like or at least I won't say maybe regional banks, I should say, like BB&T, has been one of our biggest mortgage lenders, and people like Pinnacle Bank is also another one. Although Pinnacle used to be Bank of North Carolina, I think. Are some of the primary ones that we have used, and we've done a few here, a few there. I mean, there's Wells Fargo has done a couple, and but it's I actually personally haven't approached them since the recession, because the reality is the DCLT is not currently doing a lot of home ownership. Mainly we're focused on renovating these 54 units of housing that you see here, but. I do know for a fact that Pinnacle and BB&T, we have used them since the recession. And like I said, there's a few other here, that have done one or two, but not a lot. Did they answer your question, April?
It did, thank you. And I have one other that kind of just popped up in my head. I think kind of, alluding to Ryan's question is, so let's say, we were to have an organization, our grassroots kind of neighborhood group that's looking to do this. I guess some piece of advice that you might be able to offer in terms of really the most important first few steps to setting up a successful land trust, particularly, in light of, we've got an interesting real estate market as of late. So is there anything that you would say would be the most important foundational pieces to formulating a solid land trust?
Yeah, so I know, I think working with Grounded Solutions is going to be really important. I think, they're going to be, they're going to be able to provide a lot of information and technical assistance to anyone starting a community land trust, and, obviously, resources as well. So that's critical. Knowing that the city, working with city officials and city government is going to be critical to the startup of any community land trust, because the city owns land. That may be said that that could be potentially used. But not only that, but it's also resources. I mean, we're using federal dollars. We use a lot of federal dollars in what we do. We're a CHODO, so we have access to home funds, and we have access to CDBG funds, and of course now Durham has a lot of local funds as well. So a few years ago, Durham created a penny for housing, so that a penny of all the sales tax was going to. Property tax. I'm sorry. Property tax is going to affordable housing, and then they increased it to 2 cents per 2 cents, 2 cents for housing, kind of thing. And so, and then now the $95 million housing bond. So there's a lot of those. So the city controls a lot of those resources. But so that's that's one side of the coin. But the other thing is just kind of from a community perspective. It's still. I look at it as much as still a very grassroots community effort. Now, there has certainly been community land trusts that have been created and are existing and are successful that have very little community input. But it's still, the word community and community land trust really does mean. So, and unless you have community buy-in, this is really going nowhere. And so it's important to as you're growing, as you're gaining information, is that the community has input, community is gaining knowledge about how this works, how it protects them, protects the community, how it protects the ability to create or to recycle, I should say, affordable housing, from one family to the next. Because so many people look at this, they look at this and the first thing they think is, I'm not going to own my land. the concept of not owning your land it often has negative connotations when you first hear it. Because people are concerned, they feel like they're going to lose control. In other words, what if you decide to sell the land from under me? It goes back, there has been references to sharecropping, kind of the concept of sharecropping, and that this is just a new modern day means of sharecropping. But people need to understand the importance of shared equity. And, not everybody, if you are a person who, wants to make the biggest buck you can make off of your property, you want to buy a house and you want to, it's an investment for you as in terms of you want to make as much money on it as possible. Then this model is not for you. It's important that people realize it's not for everybody. You have to be at the mindset that you are willing to make the opportunity that you had to buy affordable housing available for the next family that needs affordable housing, and that you're not of the mindset where I'm going to get all I can get and keep moving. So, there's a lot of, there's a lot of understanding that comes with the community land trust. It's never a home ownership model. It doesn't need explanation.
That's fair. Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll just add what I think you're doing is incredibly awesome. I look forward to, coming in and taking a look at it. I think it's wonderful.
We're happy to share with you, Lisa.
Thank you. Really cool.
Hey, could I just one other question I'd ask with in the current environment now, with all that we're facing, are you all seeing any new opportunities that are being created? One with the existing bond market, loans, and those kind of things are out there that may be able low interest rates that are able potentially to help expand the work that you're doing outside of the bond, just looking to the private market. Is that you seeing any of that happening in over the last 6 months?
Well, there's a couple of things that are happening. So one is, the potential, and I say it's potential because we haven't done it yet. And I don't know that anybody has, but we don't have a lot of control in the market right now. It's all being controlled by private. It's all privately controlled, and these Durham is looking at these huge developments where people are coming in and developing 200 units of housing in a single clip. But some of them are starting to think in terms of inviting like DCLT and maybe Habitat and other affordable housing developers to come in and partner with them on that, and so that they are actually incorporating some affordable housing into some of these private developments. We've been talking about doing it for years. There's a few, there's a number of barriers to that. There's a little concern and fear, I should say, on the part of private developers of getting into affordable housing. Or even incorporating affordable housing on their properties. But it's a model that Chapel Hill Community Home Trust has done extremely well. But we're just starting to even think about doing that here, or the developers are starting to think, well, maybe I could do 10% of my units. I'm doing 500 units. Maybe I could do 10% that are affordable. Kind of thing. So, we're seeing that starting to happen here on a very small scale, but hoping it will trend up.
Selena, I had a question, and I apologize because my technology has been kind of messing up a little bit. And so this question may have been asked already. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you all for a while. But in terms of governance of the CLT, how is it generally governed? How is the CLT made up?
So we're still a very traditional community land trust. We were created back in the early days when CLTs were, just getting started. So we're still very traditional. And so 2/3 of our board of directors is actually people who live in the communities that we serve. They either live in the homes that we created, so our actual, residents, and the other another third actually comes from directly from the community that we serve. And then the third group is actually a tripart. I mean, it's actually a public, public members. But it's one of the ways we hold ourselves accountable to the community and to the people we serve. Paula.
Okay, thanks. And just one other question, and we met in San Antonio.
Yeah, I remember
when we did that. So, in terms of, you talked a little bit, I think, about the market and how often you purchase and sell houses, and I'm sure that has changed during COVID. But typically, how does that trend in terms of the selling and the purchasing of land, where you get it from, and then the selling of those homes?
Yeah. So for instance, we started in the West End, Paula. We could not develop. We could not dream of developing here any longer. The neighborhood is totally gentrified. We can't be here, and we can't develop here. Now, of course, we own 200 units here, which we still, we're still we still, act as stewards on those properties. And of course, we also own a lot of rental property here that we actually manage every day. So, we have about 200 units of housing in the West End, but we can't further develop here. So we're just kind of recycling our home ownership units that we have here.
You can't further develop because you have no more land, or
because we can't,
the cost.
Yeah, because we can't afford the property. We can't afford the land, and we cannot compete with the private market for it. In other words, it takes us time to put a deal together, they're walking in with cash in their pocket and saying, here, I want to purchase this. So we can't compete with that. We have properties here, a property goes on the market, it's sold within 24 hours here.
So the bulk of your purchasing was done pre-gentrification?
Absolutely. Totally. Here in the West End, absolutely. And then, absolutely, yeah, definitely.
Well, and I think an important point too is Durham is a lot further along on the gentrification scale than Winston-Salem is.
Yeah.
I mean, the property values there have just skyrocketed over the last 10, 15 years.
Or less, yeah.
Yeah, we're not really gentrified here yet. I mean, we're not really gentrified here yet.
Which is good. So this is when you want to get on top of this, because oftentimes, like I said, we can't. Once a neighborhood has reached that point of gentrification, it's almost impossible, to expand, considerably. So this sounds like a perfect time for you to at least start land banking property, that you can set aside for affordable housing in the whenever you can get to developing it. But the idea is that you do it now before you have to compete with the market.
And again, Selena, you may have answered this, somebody may have asked this, but how did you work with the city of Durham as it relates to your CLT?
The city has been incredibly instrumental to our success. And that's just, I can't say it. They were there, as an entitlement city, they were there with federal funding. They were there with local dollars. They have donated land. They have encouraged, I was saying through our code enforcement, they have encouraged other people to sell land to us because they were in violation of code enforcement. They have been very incredibly instrumental to our. In other words, I don't think we could have been successful without the city, or certainly as successful. I mean, we could have, maybe one or two, a few properties, but nothing to the scale that we own now without the city believing in us. And let me just also, can I just add one more thing about our relationship with the city? And that is, the city was, like I said, incredibly instrumental in this. But they recognized us as a nonprofit organization who was developing housing and helping to revitalize the West End. They didn't appreciate us as a community land trust. In fact, they probably thought we were, for the most part, we were a little bit crazy. So they didn't, like I said, not until gentrification started hitting this community or hitting Durham, within the last 10 to 15 years, has the city, and not just the city, but, the county, others have started saying, oh, that's why they were doing, that's what the community land trust model is about, because now, in the West End, we're probably the only affordable housing in this community, is what was developed. I mean, Habitat has a few units left here, but the reality is Habitat units now sell for market prices.
Wow.
So, because they only restrict them for a certain period of time, and then they can go to the market. And so literally in the West End, most only affordable housing left in this community is housing that's, like I said, Habitat has a few units here, but most of them are DCLT owned properties that are rental. But what I'm saying is that the city didn't really appreciate the idea of, shared equity and permanent affordability until gentrification hit this community. And they were like, oh, well, maybe, so now what the city is doing is now, so when they put out RFPs for funding, they're starting to demand longer term affordabilities, like 20 and 30 plus years. In other words, and they're even giving you points now for the longer you will restrict the property, the higher the points you get on the point system when you're doing applications to the city now. Starting to finally appreciate the fact that we were a community land trust and not just a normal affordable housing. Somebody's Paul, that's probably you.
I don't think so.
No, okay. I can't really see who else is on the call, but like I said, they've just really started the last 10 years started recognizing or appreciating us for the fact that we were a community land trust and not just an affordable housing developer.
Does CLT have to be a CHODO, or is that just have?
Don't have to be. We're just naturally, because of the community aspect and particularly the community makeup of our board, we're just naturally a CHODO. But you would want to be. As a community land trust, you would want. It's a natural fit. You obviously don't have to jump through the hoops of being a CHODO because there is a process, and I guess, I don't know, it may be different with each city, but there is a process to qualify as a CHODO. And you obviously don't have to go through that process, but as because of the community makeup of your organization, you're a natural fit for a CHODO. And it gives you that special, it kind of gives you that, it gives you a little more access to funding.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? No? Thank you so much, Selena. This was really helpful.
Good. I'm glad it was, April.
Yeah, thank you, Selena. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
And like I said, I have a feeling you may have some folks reaching out to you with some follow-up questions, as I think their groups kind of really think about this a little more deeply.
Okay. Well, I will send you the PowerPoint.
Okay. Thank you.
And, there's no narrative to it, but obviously you'll have it.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well,
thank
thanks
you
for
so
inviting
much.
me. I'm glad we finally got together.
Yes, thank you.
Good to see you again, Paula.
Thank you, Selena. It's good seeing you.
You too. All righty. Bye-bye.
Okay, folks. So do we have any other discussion about community land trust now, or do we want to just kind of digest what we've learned, think about it, at a focus group level? Probably, I would imagine the housing stock group and or the long-term planning, but I feel like long-term planning's got a little bit going on right now. Could kind of think about I guess really the question is, how does this group see themselves in potentially supporting a community land trust, right?
I think that, if I'm not mistaken, the long-term planning group is looking at connections with community groups more. And I think to germinate a community land trust here in Winston-Salem, it's going to take that kind of groundwork and cooperation between this group, the city, and whatever group might start up a community land trustees to do it. I think certainly the housing stock group could support, but I think some of those key connections need to come through the long range planning committee.
Okay.
And April, I think that, as a CLT begins to form and the structure takes place, that it should be made up of not just residents, but people from the city or the municipality needs to also be a part of that entity.
Okay. Anything else we want to talk about today? Seeing everyone's still on the call, right? Yep. Okay.
Is that it for the?
I was going to call you out. I was going to say, we've got about 10, 15 minutes left if you want to talk about kind of what we had briefly talked about this week, Derwin.
Yeah, definitely. Appreciate that, April. Just want to as we're navigating through this and with great presentation we had today, and as we look at our goals that we have before us as we're moving towards trying to put some things before council and recommendations, I think we're in a moment where we have the opportunity just to reframe how we're moving through this process. And so, as we've mentioned in some of our past calls, just how COVID has just really kind of shaken a lot of the work, but we're back in and we're back on course now. We're moving through all of this. That, there are a bunch of groups that are out there who are concerned about housing, concerned about ensuring that we figure out in our community how to address housing. So I think it's important for us as we're moving through this thing to do it in a way where we understand our real role in that, which is bringing those skill sets that we have, those insights that we have from our backgrounds to the table in a way that helps shepherd us to some end towards recommendations. But then beyond that, really getting into that nitty-gritty work that I think so many of us are looking forward to, which is what happens after this moment, after we've made some recommendations and we're looking to the future of that. And so I'd reached out this week just to April and Marlon. I was just talking through the sense of urgency that I feel in talking to people in the community and with COVID around us addressing and moving forward with our housing strategies and plans, and understanding, I think we all in some way, shape, or form are feeling and hearing that same thing that's just been exacerbated by COVID. And one way, and there have been multiple ways around, how do we invite, those other groups and those other people to participate in our process. And I know George mentioned earlier around the community being engaged in our dialogue and our conversation. And I think that we're headed in that direction. And I think that as we get to, again, those recommendations, those hard press things that we're looking forward to creating, that gives us that place and space to begin to lay the foundations to really begin to expand the umbrella, if you will, of who's at the table, who's engaging, and how this work moves forward into the future. And even while we were here on the call today, some of the things I've been multitasking, engaging, and emailing folks about some of these things, and because again, for me, my desire and presence in this work has always been around okay, the action. How do we move to the action where as we understand the issues better, how are we moving closer and closer to those actions and the tangible things that the community needs so much. And so one commitment that you all have already made, I think is absolutely amazing. And I think the community already appreciates it. And I think as we continue to move forward, being able to feel how we continue to own our work and move our way through it, I think is going to create some great dividends for the community when we get to that place of making those recommendations toward the end of the year. And I think that's when the real work begins. I know it's been a lot of work we've done thus far, but I think the real work really starts when we have to roll up our sleeves after recommendations are made, and then we're really pushing forward many of those recommendations in some form or facet. I'll stop there. I know, April, we talked about a lot of stuff, and I don't know if I missed any of what we discussed to lean in a little more on.
I think that was it. And just kind of, as things are moved forward and actions are taken. And I think also it goes around kind of that marketing piece, that Paula had mentioned, kind of what is the group's focus? What is the role? What's each person's individual, like, kind of motivations and goals, and like, how can we kind of coalesce all of those things around the work? And it's just a lot, right? There's a lot to do. And there's a lot of reasons why everyone's here and the different expertises that everyone brings, and how can we kind of deploy those as best as possible in a very meaningful way.
April, I have one burning question.
Yeah.
And I have it because I've been contacted by a developer who is doing affordable housing 100% and starting at 30% AMI.
Wow.
But they are seeking some support from the city and asking, how close are we to be able to support a project like that, from the city? How are we supporting developers who are wanting to do affordable housing?
That's a great question. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to give you a shorter answer than it probably deserves, given the time. There's a couple different ways. I think this group inherently can and should be moving forward as, great projects that meet, I think, the goals of this group and the goals of the city move forward. The advocacy piece of this group, I think, is so valuable to developers, to dealing with any potential community pushback, particularly if there's any rezoning issues or anything like that. More specifically, though, from a resource perspective, we do have some funds, albeit not enough. As we talked earlier in this meeting about investor outreach, we do have some home funding. CDBG in theory could be appropriate, although not usually as much for a lot of regulatory reasons. Home dollars tend to be kind of the first default and the first look, because they are a federal source that's designated specifically for affordable housing. So if a developer is interested, to give you kind of a quick 101, we have what's called a developer checklist that we give them. They have to come up with, a market study, rent schedule, pro forma, management, and marketing plan, all of these things for our staff to vet the project, make sure it's in regulatory compliance, it meets the goals, it's, meets national objectives according to the funding source. As well as, on the flip side, that it's financially solvent for the period of affordability that the funding requires. So we kind of do an analysis, a loose underwriting, and then if it's something that could be feasible, then we kind of move it through the process, do an environmental review, look at, any other potential issues in that regard, funding, what have you. If there's funds available based on their ask and what we have available, we would, potentially take that then to the Community Development Housing General Government Committee, and then it would go through the process. That would be a similar process for other funding sources. I just used home as an example because it's the most kind of very specific affordable housing funds. if they are a CHODO, usually a private developer would not be. Usually it's going to be reserved for Habitat or for Community Land Trust or another, CDC that seeks CHODO designation. They could have access to additional home funds, as Selena alluded to. That is the super fast description of what the city's doing. I think as this group moves forward, there are, on that advocacy side, I think is critical to helping shape that community support that we all know is very important, to helping developers that have really great, tangible, solvent projects move forward with as little resistance as possible, right? And getting that support and kind of the urgency in front of any pushback.
Mm-hmm. And are we considering other options other than straight out funding, like tax rebates or,
I mean, there's some things on the table. I know there's some legislative issues around certain things. There are some already in place from a zoning perspective, depending on where they are and how it falls. Could there be additional concessions made there for affordable housing? Sure. I know like our utilities department is looking at potentially structuring, different fees or deferred fees for projects that have affordable housing. If we remember when Courtney came and spoke to the group last fall about that. So I think there's a lot of people working to try to find ways to make affordable housing more feasible and more attractive. Also, as Lisa had mentioned, looking to do more RFP processes to make it a little more crystal clear to developers what we're looking for and make it a quicker process for them. So it's less guesswork and money up front for developers, and they can kind of just simply respond with their best project, with their best foot forward, I think is important as well. And I know that folks on our team are working on, albeit a small one, but working to do that. So I think if that goes well and we get a good response, it could pave the way for kind of how we do some things forward.
I think this is where an RFP could really come in handy. If you're having interest being expressed by developers in doing this, the RFP would give the city a chance to pull together what it will offer in terms of what it's going to put on the table for a developer, and then see what kind of developers respond, and gives you a chance to kind of get as high quality a project as possible that would fit our objectives.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing Paul said. I think one of the things that we don't have right now as a community is very clear objectives and goals around, at least for municipal resources on affordable housing. I think we know the challenges and we see the issues and challenges, but that RFP would help put in real clear terms and words. The city we have a deficit of X number of units, and we want to use our resources to create X number of units, and we're willing to put tax increment financing on the table for affordable housing. We're willing to do X, Y, and Z, bond funds, whatever those things are to help get that, and then putting that back out. So I think that absent of that, I think sometimes the city is just acting, April, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think the city is just acting more of, folks come to the city with ideas and projects rather than the city really going outward to say, hey, this is what we want, this is what we're looking for you to do, unless it's been a project out there that had been started and had capacity to grow. They may have only started with doing, a few units. And I think in those areas, I think the city may go back to those folks and say, do you have capacity to do more? But normally it's kind of folks coming to the city and saying, we have an idea, rather than the city doing some of the stuff we're doing, identifying areas and need, putting it back out to the community in that RFP. This is what we are asking you to respond to.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think Marla's put some things in motion to shift that, to be more proactive towards the RFP process. We just have a lot going on, right? And COVID. Yeah. But I think that's definitely the direction that, we would like to be moving into. And so now I think it's taking a lot of these resources and studies and things that we've learned, utilizing, the expertise of this group and really coalescing it into some meaningful strategies of how to get some some really good, clear thoughts of the resources that we do currently have in front of us. How do we best deploy them? And then how do we build on that momentum?
I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm happy to provide you with, we're doing a public-private partnership in downtown Asheboro right now. We just got funded. We're doing a mill that has a sky bridge that connects to a senior center. So our residents will get a hot meal twice a day, 5 days a week, and all the services. And the city of Asheboro has come in and helped us obtain more parking. You know, I could send some examples of, you know, the public-private partnerships that we've done with communities, and maybe that would give you some ideas. I can get
that would be great.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, great question though, Paula. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll continue to share, you know, as a staff with the group as we meet, you know, any kind of updates or developments on, you know, deploying new strategies or where we're going or anything like that, that's relevant. So we can kind of continue to build on the momentum and again, pull out, you know, all of the expertise that you all have in different facets of this situation. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was a very productive meeting, very a lot. So I will really aim to get out kind of a recap next week, as well as a lot of those follow-up pieces of information that we spoke about. And we'll kind of continue to build momentum ahead of the working group meetings next month. And if you all need anything or want to see anything more, please don't be shy.
Thanks, April.
Thank you all so much. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, April.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good one. Bye.
Thank you.